Lincoln Brewster, glory to the King. Hark the herald angels sing. Welcome back. You are listening to Open Up the Doors here on Faith FM, WEGB 90.7 and 93.3 in Napeague, and WEGQ 91.7 in Quag. And I am streaming live on Facebook Live. I've been streaming live on Facebook Live since the beginning of the show, but had some people texting me saying it wasn't going through, so I don't know why. Must have been just some kind of a Facebook glitch or a Wi-Fi glitch, but I am back on there now, I do believe. It was showing me that it was going live. I had my little live thing on there, and I was wondering why no one was joining in. I didn't see anybody there. And I'm like, where was everybody? Did everybody get raptured? Jeez, like I left behind. Don't know. No, I'm only kidding. But I am back, I think, on Facebook Live. And if you're just tuning in, having fun here on my Christmas edition of Open Up the Doors, and there are some things I want to share on that I've been kind of giving out teasers about the last couple of weeks. We read in John chapter 10, verse 22. That it was the Feast of Dedication, it says there in John, Gospel of John 10:22. Now, it was the Feast of Dedication in Jerusalem, and it was winter. And Jesus walked in the temple in Solomon's porch. Then the Jews surrounded him and said to him, "How long do you keep us in doubt? If you are the Messiah, tell us plainly." Jesus answered and said, "I told you, but you do not believe. But the works that I do in my Father's name, they bear witness to me, but you do not believe, because you are not of my sheep." Hanukkah, the Feast of Lights. You know, this weekend, and every several years, every 7, 8, 9 years sometimes, Hanukkah and Christmas fall on the same day. It's that way this year. Hanukkah begins this year on sundown, on Saturday, or Christmas Eve. And Hanukkah, in the Jewish calendar, is on Kislev 25. The Hebrew month is called Kislev, the 25th of Kislev. It's the 9th month in the Hebrew calendar. But Hanukkah, it's the Feast of Lights. We know the story, the oil for the menorah, which is just a small part of the story. But the oil for the menorah was going to run out after they had recaptured the temple. I'll get into that in a minute. But they only had 1 day supply, but it lasted for 8 days. That's why there are 8 candles, really 9. The one in the middle is used to light the other 8, because each candle symbolizes the 1 day that they had oil in the menorah for light, because they only had a 1 day supply. Yet God miraculously supplied oil for 8 days, and we're told in the Gospel of John that it was the Feast of Dedication. In other words, it was Kislev 25. It was the rededication of the second temple. I want to give you some background for that, because Jesus is walking on Kislev 25 in the temple in Solomon's porch, and the one who said that he was the light of the world, he's the one who's walking in Solomon's porch on that Feast of Lights. The one who said that he was greater than Solomon was walking in Solomon's portico in the temple on the feast of the dedication, the rededication of the temple. The one who had said, speaking of himself, "Destroy this temple, and I will raise it up in 3 days." There he was on the Feast of Dedication, a feast dripping with messianic overtones and dripping with end-time revelation and implications. The Pharisees surround him. They had a reason for asking him what they asked him. "If you are the Messiah, stop keeping us in suspense. Why don't you just tell us?" And Jesus said, "I've been telling you." You need to understand, and I want to share a little bit about the background, the story behind what's going on here, the background and the story of the Feast of Dedication. Because you might be wondering, what does this have to do with Christmas? And I want to suggest to you, maybe more than anyone really wants to pay attention to or give heed to. But it's a historical account, the Feast of Dedication. It's replete, as I said a moment ago, with both messianic and eschatological overtones. It really begins back in 168 BC, when the Syrian king, the Syrian general, Antiochus Epiphanes, he invaded Jerusalem. And he invaded Jerusalem on December 25th in 168 BC. And just like this year, December 25th landed on Kislev 25. And Antiochus, he comes into Jerusalem and he destroys the city. And he goes into the temple and he sets up in the temple an image of Zeus. And he slaughters and sacrifices pigs and unclean animals on the altar of God. Antiochus Epiphanes is really a type of Antichrist. His very name means God manifest. In fact, if you were to go back and read that fuller section in John chapter 10, if that little discussion between Jesus and the Pharisees, it says they picked up stones to stone him. And Jesus says to them, "For what good work do you stone me for?" And the Pharisees say, "We don't stone you for any good work, but you being a man, make yourself out to be God." Here Jesus was on the Feast of Dedication, proclaiming himself to be God, which is essentially what Antiochus Epiphanes had done. His name means God manifest. Antiochus, the Jews called him the Wicked One. He set up a statue of Zeus in the temple. He sacrificed pigs on the altar. He caused all Jewish religious activities to stop. He forbade the observance of the Sabbath and of the traditional feasts. All Jewish sacrifices were made to stop. Exactly what the coming Antichrist is going to do in another rebuilt temple. But I won't digress down that road right now. But Antiochus Epiphanes, he forbade the reading of the law of Moses and gave orders to search out all existing copies of the Torah, and he destroyed them. If anyone was found with a Torah, with a Tanakh, the Old Testament, they were killed. He forbade the practice of circumcision, for it was circumcision that set the Jews apart from other peoples. See, Antiochus was trying to create this one world system under the Syrian Empire, this one world religion under their gods. Now, I'll be honest with you, that's the Reader's Digest version of all that Antiochus did. And it all began on December 25th in 168 BC. December 25th fell on Kislev 25 in 168 BC. But God raised up a man named Judah Maccabees, who's a type of Messiah. And after a series of truly miraculous victories over the Syrian forces, victories that were miraculous, Judah Maccabees defeated the forces of Antiochus Epiphanes. He drove the Syrians out of Jerusalem, and he rebuilt the defiled altar and cleansed the temple, and he did it. He did it. The rededication of the temple was literally 3 years to the day on Kislev 25 in 165 BC. Exactly 3 years after Antiochus had defiled the temple, it was retaken by the Jews and rededicated to God. Why Kislev 25? Why this feast? Well, like I said, it was the day that they retook and recaptured the city and cleansed the temple. Now, one of the things that is of interest, why the Jews would ask Jesus, "If you're the Messiah, tell us." Because one of the things that Judah Maccabees did when they took the temple back, when they got into the temple, they saw that it had been defiled and desecrated. The statue of Zeus was in the Holy of Holies. There were idols all over it. But what they saw was that on the brazen altar, the altar where the sacrifices of God were to be made, it had been defiled by a pig. So they tore the altar down. They took all the stones of the altar and they put those stones off to the side and rebuilt a new altar. And they didn't know what to do with the stones, because on the one hand, they were consecrated stones, because those were the stones of the holy altar where the sacrifices were made. On the other hand, it had been defiled, and they honestly did not know what to do with the stones. So we're told from the Maccabees and from the historians that they just laid the stones off to the side, and they said, when Messiah comes, he will tell us what we are to do with those stones of the altar. So they were expecting the Messiah to come in some ways, on Kislev 25, the Feast of Dedication, to tell him what to do with the stones of the altar. So there was a reason why these Pharisees were asking Jesus as he was walking around the temple, if you're the Messiah, tell us. See, there was something behind that question. But we read in the book of Maccabees. Now, I understand that as Protestant Christians, we don't recognize the authority, the canonical authority of the books of Maccabees. They're in the Apocrypha. They are apocryphal books. It doesn't mean that they're phony or fake. It just means that we didn't include them in our Bible. But they are included in Catholic Bibles, and they're good reading for historical purposes. And that's really what 1st and 2nd Maccabees should be shown as, historical, because it is valid and it is true history. And we learn about the Maccabean wars in them. But I'm saying all that for this purpose, because according to 2nd Maccabees, the relighting of the altar fire by Nehemiah, the temple that was cleansed was the temple that was rebuilt after the Babylonian exile. That temple was Nehemiah and Zerubbabel's temple. And one of the things that the rabbis had taught was that when Nehemiah had rebuilt the temple after the Babylonian exile, that fire from God came down and lit the sacrifice. We don't read that in our Bible. But in Leviticus, when Moses built the tabernacle of meeting, fire came down and lit the sacrifice. In 1 Chronicles 7, or 2 Chronicles 7, when Solomon dedicated the temple to God, when he first built the temple, the Bible tells us that fire came down from heaven and lit the sacrifice on the altar. So there's historical precedent twice for when the initial altar was being dedicated to God, that God himself lit the fire. Now, when Nehemiah rebuilt the temple after the Babylonian exile, the Jews believed the same thing happened. And it says here, I'm going to read it out of 1st Maccabees, and there's a reason I'm sharing all of this. On the 25th day, this is out of 2nd Maccabees 1:18. On the 25th day of the month of Kislev, we will celebrate the festival of rededication, just as we celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles. And there's something interesting there, even with that statement. Some people say, why didn't they rededicate the temple on the Feast of Tabernacles, which was the original dedication in 2 Chronicles under Solomon's temple? Because there was a war going on. And Antiochus Epiphanes, they couldn't celebrate any of their feasts for 3.5 years. And they were still fighting a battle to regain the temple and Jerusalem during the proper time for the Feast of Tabernacles. So now we're into the month of Kislev, which is the 9th month. The Feast of Tabernacles is celebrated, in the 7th month of the Hebrew calendar. Let me read it. I wanted to give you this background because I'm going somewhere with this. That's exciting. On the 25th day of the month of Kislev, we will celebrate the festival of rededication, just as we celebrate the festival of shelters or tabernacles. We thought it important to remind you of this, so that you may celebrate this festival, which Jesus was doing. He was there in the temple on the Feast of Dedication. We thought it important to remind you of this, so that you may celebrate this festival. In this way, you will remember how fire appeared when Nehemiah offered sacrifices after he had rebuilt the temple and the altar. So here was Jesus walking in the temple on Kislev 25. And basically, the Pharisees are saying, who do you think you are? What is so special about the Feast of Tabernacles? What is so special about Kislev 25? And does it have anything to do with when Jesus was born? I'm going to get to that in a moment. Stick around. I'll be back with more. The fusion of heart, mind, and soul. This is Open Up the Doors with Andy White here on Faith FM. WEGB 90.7 and 93.3 in Epic. WEGQ 91.7 in Quad. Thanks for tuning in with me for my special Christmas edition of Open Up the Doors. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for being here. If you want to email me, you can email me at ajwhite777 at icloud.com. That's ajwhite777 at icloud.com. And please also visit the Faith FM Facebook page at www.eastgatebroadcasting.com, and also my Open Up the Doors Facebook page at facebook.com/faithfm91.7. I start getting both Facebook pages like confused, but go and like our pages. Please like the Faith FM Facebook page as well as my Open Up the Doors Facebook page. Especially on my Open Up the Doors Facebook page, I will keep in more of a personal contact with you. That's why I set that up separate from the Faith FM page, because I didn't want to, the Faith FM is a lot of different things going on, a lot of different broadcasting, and it's all great broadcasting, and I didn't want to I didn't want to like just crowd everything out on that page, which is why I started the Open Up the Doors Facebook page. If you want to correspond with me directly and stay abreast of the things I'm talking about. And one of the things I am talking about is Christmas and Hanukkah, and how they are really far more related than I think a lot of people really have ever thought about. But I have a theory, and here we go. When was Jesus born? We know that there's a lot of controversy, to say the least. Every year we hear about how Jesus really wasn't born on December 25th. I'm going to challenge that mode of thinking. It's been so inundated in us. But I'm going to tell you something. I've spent the last several weeks pretty much studying and reading several different theories of when Jesus was born. Some believe, like Jonathan Cahn, and I love Jonathan Cahn. Jonathan Cahn's a great prophet of God, a great man of God. He happens to believe Jesus was born in the month of Nisan. Nisan first, in fact, he says, which is the first month of the Hebrew calendar. And I read his reasons for it, and he's got some good things to say, but I also thought there was some flimsy evidence and some things that I felt were personally flimsy. A lot of people, especially our Messianic brothers, believe that Jesus was born during the Feast of Tabernacles in October. That's widely held belief, that Jesus was actually born during the Feast of Tabernacles around October. Again, I understand the theory. I've read it through. I've seen their evidence. Some of it is questionable. Some of it is speculative. All theories are. So I'm going to begin by saying this. This is my theory. You don't have to buy into my theory, but my theory is based on literal historical facts, not speculations and not feelings, but on looking at the facts of the historical record. And I really I've come to my own personal belief that I believe Jesus was born on Kislev 25, the Feast of Dedication. I believe that when Jesus was walking around in that temple, what was he thinking about? Was it literally his birthday? Now, Kislev 25 doesn't always fall on December 25th. The calendars, the Hebrew calendar and our Gregorian calendar, our Roman calendar, they're not in sync. So the dates shift around. But Kislev 25 does fall on December 25th every so often. And the denial, one of the biggest things with the birth of Jesus that we've heard through the years, is that the denial of Jesus being born in the winter is based almost entirely on a false premise. It always starts out with the assertion that the shepherds near Bethlehem could not have been in the fields in the wintertime. But that's flat out and demonstrably wrong, according to historical records. It has been clearly shown that the temple shepherds near the Migdal Adair, which is something I spoke on last week, and I'm not going to cover that all again this week, I don't have the time, but last week I spoke about the Migdal Adair, the Tower of the Flock, where Jesus most likely, definitely, was laid in the manger in the Tower of the Flock. Listen to last week's broadcast to hear what I said about that. But the simple fact is that those temple shepherds in Bethlehem, they were out year-round, 24/7, 365. That's a fact of history. So the very basic foundation that Jesus could not have been born in the winter because the Bible tells us the shepherds were out in the field at night, that's just bogus. It's just been a bogus argument that people have bought into. So I believe, as I've said, it is very possible that Jesus was actually born in Kislev 25 in 5 BC, which became Hanukkah, the Feast of Dedication, back in 165 BC. And there's compelling evidence for me to be saying that. We know that Jesus, the Bible tells us that in the Gospel of Luke, there was in the days of Herod. You see, there were in Luke chapter 1, there were two big time clues. It says there was in the days of Herod, the king of Judea, a certain priest named Zacharias of the division of Abijah. Stop the tape. There are two clues as to when we can date the year that Jesus was born. At least the year, if not the date. We know that Jesus was born in the days of Herod. But history tells us, and this is a fact of history, we are told, according to the historical record, that King Herod died sometime in April of 4 BC. I got to do a little bit of computer work here right now for a second. Give me 1 second, because if I don't do this, everything's going to get messed up. I need to do this real quick. I'm usually doing this when the song's on, but I didn't time it right today because I got a lot here and I want to get through this. All right. History tells us that Herod died roughly in April of 4 BC. That means Jesus had to be born in either 5 or 6 BC. Most scholars place Jesus' birth in 5 BC. Some place it in 6 BC. No one places it outside of that, further back than that. He had to be born in either 6 BC or 5 BC. I hold personally to a 5 BC year. And it just so happens that just like this year, this weekend, when the Feast of Dedication, Hanukkah, is on the same day as December 25th, it just so happens that in 5 BC it was the same thing. In 5 BC, the Feast of Dedication was on December 25th. Now, for Jesus to have been born in 5 BC, which I believe, how can we get at that? The other clue, Herod was the easy one. We know that Jesus was born before Herod died because the Magi come to Herod. Herod gets tricked by the Magi, and he slaughters the innocents. And that all fits within the time frame of a 5 BC birth, by the way, and I'll get to that in a minute. I hope I don't run out of time. But here's an essential piece of evidence. And it took a lot of digging, and it took a lot of research. But we read, and the Word of God, there's always things there for a reason. Always things there for a reason. We read in Luke, as I just read, that there was in the days of Herod, the king of Judea, a certain priest named Zacharias of the division of Abijah. So it was that while he, Zacharias, was serving as priest before God in the order of his division, according to the custom of the priesthood, his lot fell to burn incense when he went into the temple of the Lord. And the whole multitude of the people was praying outside at the hour of incense. If we can figure out when Zacharias was serving in the temple, we can essentially figure out when Jesus was born. And we can do that. You see, back in Chronicles, I believe it's 1 Chronicles 24. Might be 2 Chronicles. I think it's 1 Chronicles 24. We see that the priesthood, the Levitical priests, were divided into 24 courses. And each course was to serve in the temple for 8 days, from one Sabbath to another Sabbath, from Saturday to Saturday, an 8-day service. And since there were 24 courses, that means, and there was 24 courses, and that means what would happen essentially would be that roughly every 149 days or so, or every 150, I think it's 149 days, the cycle would repeat. So every course of the priesthood had to serve basically twice a year, but they actually serve 5 times a year, and I'll tell you why. And I do believe that's in, let me look here. I'm pretty sure it was Chronicles 24. But the priests, the lots are spoken about there. It talks about this, the vision of Abijah, the vision of Jehoiarib, which was the first division. That's why this is important. Because what was the custom of Israel throughout its history since the building of the temple was that these divisions of the priests, these 24 courses of the priests, wound up serving 5 times a year, twice in their regular cycle, and then during the 3 pilgrimage feasts, the feasts of Passover, Yom Kippur, and the Feast of Tabernacles, it was all hands on deck. all of the visions had to serve on those 3 feast days, those pilgrimage feasts, when a multitude of people would be in Israel, and there would be thousands upon thousands of sacrifices. Well, it just so happens, if you do the math, and it can be done, there was a Jewish historian named Josephus, a first-century Jewish historian. And when the temple was destroyed in 70 A.D., Josephus records that the division of the priests that was serving at that time of the destruction of the temple in 70 A.D. was of the division of Jehoiarib. Now, according to Chronicles, Jehoiarib was the first division, and Abijah was the 8th, I believe it says. You could look that up in Chronicles. I believe his was the 8th. My point here, to cut to the chase, is because Josephus recorded when who was serving in the temple when it was destroyed, Jehoiarib, you can backdate that. You can calculate that backwards to the time when Zacharias would have been serving in 6 BC. And it just turns out that Zechariah, not only would his regular division have fallen due in the month of October for the Feast of Tabernacles, everyone had to be there for the Feast of Tabernacles anyway. So by those calculations, we can determine that Zacharias was serving in the temple during the Feast of Tabernacles in 6 BC, which would have been roughly in early to mid-October, when the angel of Gabriel came and spoke to him. And it says, and the whole multitude of the people was outside praying at the hour of incense. The only reason there would have been a whole multitude of people would have been because it was a feast. If it had been one of the regular service times, there wouldn't have been a whole multitude of people. So I think every one of these lines, this evidence in the Bible, it points to something. And here's the thing. The angel tells Zacharias that his wife, Elizabeth, who's been barren, is going to have a child. So when Zacharias is done serving in the temple during the Feast of Tabernacles in October of 6 BC, he goes home to his wife. Hi, honey, I'm home. Guess what the angel told me? And the rest was history, so to speak. Elizabeth becomes pregnant. Roughly, we can assume, based on this time work, in October of 6 BC. Well, now, let's fast forward it a little bit, because the angel comes to Mary to announce that she's been chosen of God to bear the Messiah. And the angel says to Mary, and even now, your cousin Elizabeth is 6 months pregnant. Well, if Elizabeth had gotten pregnant in October, this means that Mary most likely conceived in late March of 5 BC. If that's the case, and it's very, very possible, that Mary conceived Jesus in 5 BC, that places the birth of Jesus into December, or Kislev, and most exactly Kislev 25, according to this theory. And, you know, I can buy into that. I really can. I can't prove it. Nobody can prove anything. That's the kind of the thing that's kind of funny about all of this, is that people are always arguing over their theories. None of it's provable. But when I look at what God has done, when I look at how God has worked, it would just make so much sense. Why December 25th? Why has December 25th been such a stumbling block, especially to Christians who want to insist that Jesus could not have been born in the wintertime, based on faulty premises? It's because they want to say that, well, you know, December 25th, it was an ancient pagan holiday. So you could probably pick any day of the year and say it was an ancient pagan holiday. The very reason, by the way, that Antiochus Epiphanes went in on Kislev 25th, which was December 25th in 165, was in fact to offer up sacrifices to Zeus, because it was their pagan holiday. So there is no dispute that the pagans celebrated on December 25th. That's true. But I say, so what? because the Jewish people redeemed it when they rededicated the temple, because it was on Kislev 25. And don't forget that the rabbis had already been teaching that the fire on the altar of Nehemiah's temple had already been lit on Kislev 25. That's the reason Nehemiah gave. Not only was the recapturing of Jerusalem and the cleansing of the temple on Kislev 25, it was also the date that the rabbis had given that fire came down from heaven and lit the sacrifice on the altar. So now here's Jesus, the one who's going to come and baptize us with the Holy Ghost and fire, the one who's the true light of the world, walking in the temple on Kislev 25. But someone might say, but Brother Andy, does that give enough time for the Magi to come? Because I thought all this through. Because for my theory to work, you got to fit it within the right time frame. The Magi come from the east, and they go to Herod. Remember, Herod died, scholars say, in early, or rather April of 4 BC. So I got to thinking, could there be enough time for the Magi to come and for Herod to kill the innocents in that 4 or 5 month period? And there could have been. Because according to scholars, the wise men from the east who came from Babylon, which makes perfect sense because they were astrologers and they knew the Jewish scriptures, those wise men said, we have seen his star in the east. They knew the scriptures because Israel had been in Babylon in captivity for 70 years, practicing their religion, writing their commentary called the Targum, and they understood the Jewish scriptures. And they knew that the scriptures said that a star shall rise in Judah, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be. The Magi knew the scriptures, and they saw his star rise in the east, they said. So we can assume, because the scripture tells us, that star was there when Jesus was born in December, and if they were to see it right away, which they said they did, and they were to follow it, it would have taken them about 2 months to get from Babylon to Jerusalem on camelback. The journey was roughly 2 months. That puts them into Jerusalem in late February. They go and they visit Herod. And they said, where is he who was born the king of the Jews? Herod calls in the scribes and the lawyers of the law to find out where the Messiah was to be born, because everyone knew and was taught that Messiah was to be born at the Migdal Adair, the temple of the flock in Bethlehem Ephratah. O Bethlehem Ephratah, though you be little amongst the thousands of Judah, yet out of you shall he come forth to be ruler in Israel. They understood that. They knew that. So the Magi go to Bethlehem to see Jesus, and it's probably late February. They were in the house, the Bible tells us. They don't go back to Herod as Herod had told them to. Herod goes, and I'm doing this fast as I'm running out of time. Herod goes into a rage, and he kills all of the babies under 2 years old, and he probably just overestimated that because he was Herod. I did a lot of reading on Herod. He was a lunatic. He was an insane egomaniac, and he just wanted to make sure. Lots of times people say, well, that shows us that Jesus was 2 years old. No, it doesn't. It just shows us Herod was a nut. Herod wanted to kill every child over the age, over any possibility of him being, removed from his throne. That all could have happened in early March, mid-March of 4 BC. Herod died in April, according to historians, in 4 BC. I would suggest to you, as part of the judgment of God, for the killing of those babies, for the slaughter of those babies, for the slaughter of that innocent blood. And Herod shed a lot of innocent blood in his time. And I'm running out of time. I can't believe how much time has gone by. And I just want to say this. You don't have to agree with my conclusions. I think it's intriguing. I think it's fascinating. You don't have to agree with my conclusions, but you can't deny the evidence, because the evidence that is there is facts. If you want to disagree with the conclusion, let it be based on facts and evidence and not on some visceral antagonism towards December 25th. We can celebrate. No matter what day Jesus was born, we all can agree on this. Thank God, for unto us a Savior was born, who is Christ the Lord. I really don't care. Jesus could have been born August 3rd for all that matters. That's not my point. I'm not arguing, dogmatically for December 25th. I'm just trying to share something that I find very interesting. That we've been so tuned and indoctrinated into thinking it's not December 25th. And I believe that the devil just wants to do that to try and undermine our faith, to try and undermine the things that we believe. Because, if you can undermine that, then maybe everything else is wrong. I want to say to you, I think Jesus was born on Kislev 25. Sometimes it's December 25th, sometimes it's December 14th, sometimes it's December 6th. But in 5 BC, Kislev 25 landed on December 25th, just like it is right now. And should we throw out the truth? Should we throw out anything because Satan fabricated a lie and a counterfeit? Skeptics and unbelievers of the virgin birth and of the deity of Christ, they use the same logic by saying that the nativity story is based on ancient pagan myths and legends. So just because a bunch of pagans celebrated December 25th as their winter solstice doesn't mean that we just stole it from them. It just means Satan counterfeited something that was going to happen, that was really true and really powerful. You see, no counterfeit works unless it can mimic the real things, the real thing. And I just want to say this, as I'm running out of time, that this is the greatest time of year. We're in the season of lights. This is the greatest time of year to bear witness of the light, to bear witness of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Because one of the things Zechariah proclaimed when his son John, the forerunner of the Messiah, was born, Zechariah, he said, the day spring from on high has visited us to give light to those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death. Christmas is a time for us to bear witness of the light. Christmas is our feast of lights. The one who truly came to purify our desecrated temple. The one who came to restore our pure and true worship of God. Christmas, the season of lights, the feast of dedication, the rededication of the sacrifices on the altar, the rededication of the relighting of the light in the temple, and the relighting of the fire on the altar. And perhaps what we need on Christmas, perhaps what we need this Christmas, is our own rededication to the things of God.
I wish you a Merry Christmas. We wanna wish you a Merry Christmas. We wanna wish you a Merry Christmas from the bottom
of my heart. I want to wish you a Merry Christmas. My hope, my wish, my prayer for you this Christmas is that you and your household may have a blessed and wonderful Christmas. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Have a safe Christmas. God bless. I'll see you next week. Thanks for tuning in to Open Up the Doors.